Hi, my name's Cheyenne, and I'm at the site of the LeBret Indian Residential School. It's right behind me. We couldn't go in because of COVID regulations, and they had barricades up, so I thought I would come to LeBret and show you from here. So the LeBret Residential School opened in 1884, and it closed in 1998. It was ran by the Roman Catholic Church and the Grey Nuns up until 1973. It was one of the first 3 residential schools opened in Canada. And the school is located on White Calf First Nations, which is also Wapiamoose Reserve. This is west of the village of LeBret, where I am right now, and it's on Treaty 4 territory. LeBret School has a long history as one of the first residential schools open and the last to close. It's the longest running residential school, as it was open until 1998. But it was not run by the church and the government until 1998. It was run by the church and the government until 1973. And after 1973, White Calf Reserve took over, and they kept the doors open till 1998. And then in 1999, it was demolished, which is why there is no building behind me. So the concept I decided to focus on for this project was cause and consequence. As residential schools, there obviously was a cause and a lot of consequences that came from it. So when talking about the cause of residential schools, the initial cause was to educate the Indigenous students, but it quickly turned into assimilating them from their Indigenous cultures. So it was to assimilate the Indigenous children into the Euro-Canadian culture, and have them a part of the Canadian society. It was an attempt to educate them, but it did end up converting the Indigenous youth using the Roman Catholic ways and making them a part of the Canadian society. It did really disturb their lives, their communities, and it caused a lot of long-term effects with Indigenous people. A lot happened at residential schools that were not good things. There was a lot of abuse towards these kids. They were isolated from their culture as soon as they got to the school. They were removed from their homes, taken away from their parents, and separated from their siblings. A lot of time they were separated by gender as well, and they were not allowed to speak their language, even if they were writing letters back home to their parents. This was trying to assimilate the students, and that was the first way of doing it. They were also stripped of their traditional clothing and cut their hair as soon as they got to the school, and they were given new uniforms. In many cases, they were also given new names as another attempt to strip this. The girls and boys had different roles throughout this. The girls were responsible for house cleaning, cooking, sewing, laundry, and the boys did more labor jobs: carpentry, construction, general maintenance, and agricultural labor. Many students, as I said, did suffer abuse at residential schools, or excessive punishment, including physical abuse. In some cases, they were heavily beaten or locked in certain places. Some of the staff were also sexual predators, so that was a big part of that interracial trauma, was the sexual abuse that happened at residential schools. And they were also very malnourished and underfed, which led to a lot of diseases such as tuberculosis or influenza back in that time. And for consequences, as we can see, and a lot of us have learned, that there are a lot of long-term consequences that happen from residential schools. So there's estimated 6,000 children that died in residential schools, but those records are not complete, as a lot of the staff members did not keep records of the kids that died. And as we can see, as I've talked about the intergenerational trauma, there is a lot of abuse now that came from residential schools, a lot of drug and alcohol abuse, a lot of sexual abuse, a lot of environments that are not up to living standards because of these schools. and they didn't learn a lot about relationships outside of the schools, so it was hard for them to build connections, relationships once they left. So that's a little bit about cause and consequences that happen at residential schools. And for my activity of the class, I would get the class to visit the site, and we would talk about it, go over all this kind of stuff together, and then I'd want my students to make a list of what they did in a day, what they eat, what they do when they come home from school, what time they get up, all those things, and I would compare it to a list of a day of a kid at a residential school to let the kids see like how different life is compared to residential schools. And then we would also write a letter to a child in a residential school. So this letter would be written as if the residential schools were still there and we were writing a letter to a student, asking what it was like, asking certain questions about their lives, making them feel better, or what we would want them to tell us about residential schools so that we had more information today. And that is my land invitation.